The chamber erupted as Judge Judy clashed with Jasmine Crockett over criminal justice reform. 30 years of courtroom power met one fearless voice, and the battle turned explosive. When Jasmine exposed a policy from the 1980s targeting black communities, Judy fell silent. One line echoed across millions of screens, "I don't bow to bullies." How did a young congresswoman break America's toughest judge on live TV? Stay with us, this is a story worth every second of your time. The congressional hearing room was packed tight, the glow of television lights bouncing off the polished wood like sparks before a fire. Dozens of cameras pointed toward the stage lenses, ready to capture every twitch, every breath. The banner above the panel read in bold black letters, "Criminal Justice Reform and Inequality in the American Legal System." It wasn't just a title, it was a warning. The subject was explosive, the kind of issue that split families, parties, and the country itself. Everyone inside knew they weren't here for calm debate. They were here for a collision. Judge Judy Sheindlin made her entrance like a general walking into battle heels, clicking against the floor with sharp precision. At 81, she carried herself as if every chair in the room still bowed to her authority. Her chin tilted high, her eyes narrow, her mouth drawn into the faintest smirk of superiority. When her gaze locked on Jasmine Crockett, it wasn't neutral. It was a glare filled with open contempt, the look of someone who saw a rookie daring to stand where legends stood. In that glare was a message. "You don't belong here." Judy leaned toward the microphone, her voice cutting through the room like shattered glass. "I've presided over tens of thousands of cases," she sneered, her words deliberate, dripping with disdain. "And you, what, a few years as a lawyer, a short stint in Congress, and now you think you can teach me what justice is?" The sentence landed like a slap across the chamber, cruel mocking designed to humiliate. Every camera in the room zoomed tighter. Every spectator froze in their seat. The first blow had been struck. The silence from Judy's first strike still hung heavy in the air, but she wasn't finished. She smelled blood, and she went in for the kill. Her voice rose sharper, harder, like a whip cracking across the chamber. "You represent a weak generation," she snapped, every word coated in venom. "A generation that blames the system instead of teaching people responsibility. That's not justice, that's an excuse." Her tone wasn't just dismissive, it was brutal, meant to strip dignity right there under the lights. Then came the cruelest touch. Judy leaned back and gave a dry, mocking laugh. She shook her head slowly, like a teacher scolding a child too stubborn to learn. The gesture wasn't loud, but it carried more weight than her words, the kind of condescension that cut deeper than shouting ever could. For Judy, this wasn't debate anymore. It was public shaming. The reaction was immediate. A pocket of the audience erupted into applause, clapping and nodding, emboldened by Judy's bravado. The sound ricocheted around the chamber like gunfire, pounding against Jasmine's composure, turning the room into a hostile arena. Every cheer felt like another shove, daring Jasmine to stumble. In that moment, the hearing was no longer about policy or reform. It had been twisted into a stage for Judy's dominance. She stood tall in her self-made spotlight, reveling in the display of authority. The cameras caught it all, the sneer, the smirk, the false sense of victory. For Judy, it was power. For Jasmine, it was pressure. For the nation watching it was war. The applause still rattled through the chamber like aftershocks, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, her back straight, her face carved from stone. The only hint of reaction was the faint curl of a smile, calm, razor-sharp, and dangerous. It wasn't the grin of someone humiliated. It was the look of someone waiting for her turn to strike. The camera zoomed in, sensing the shift. The silence now belonged to her. Jasmine leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady, cool, and deliberate. "With all due respect, ma'am," she began, her words cutting through the air like a scalpel. "Justice is not just the story of the courtroom you once presided over. Justice is the story of the entire system." Her tone wasn't raised, but it carried an undeniable force, each word aimed straight at Judy. The room leaned in the tension, snapping from applause to suspense in an instant. Then she dropped it, the fact that made the air crackle. According to the United States Sentencing Commission's 2017 report, she said, her voice ironclad, "Black defendants receive sentences that are on average 19% longer than white defendants convicted of the exact same crimes." The number landed like a hammer blow, heavy and undeniable, echoing across the chamber. The audience murmured, stunned by the weight of government data. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't a theory. It was fact carved into the record. But Judy shot forward, fury flashing in her eyes, her voice snapping like a whip. Statistics are nothing but academic games, she barked, stabbing a finger into the air. I judge people with my own eyes, not with a chart or a spreadsheet. Her words were sharp, her tone desperate, the authority in her voice trembling just enough for the cameras to catch. The chamber erupted again in whispers and gasps, but the balance had shifted. Jasmine had drawn blood, and everyone watching knew it. The tension in the hearing room had reached a boiling point, but no one expected what came next. Judy's eyes narrowed like a predator, spotting a wounded target. She rose slightly from her chair, not fully standing, but enough to loom. Her fingers shot across the table, slicing the air with authority and venom. Her voice was sharp, not loud, but laced with something far more dangerous: contempt. She didn't attack Jasmine's policy. She went for her person. You're not old enough to understand what justice even means. The words rang out like a gunshot in a silent hall. Not a challenge, an insult. Not a disagreement, an erasure. Judy didn't just question Jasmine's credentials. She dismissed her existence in the world of justice altogether. The tone in her voice wasn't frustration, it was supremacy. She didn't pause. She twisted the knife. When I was out there protecting communities, you were probably still learning how to hold a damn pen in law school. That line didn't just sting, it dripped with deliberate humiliation. It told everyone in that chamber, and every viewer watching live, that Jasmine was a child, a pretender in the presence of a giant. It wasn't about age, it was about power. Judy was drawing a line in the sand and daring Jasmine to cross it. Judy leaned back slightly, her arms folded with a sneer curling across her face as if she'd just delivered a final verdict. But she wasn't done. Not yet. Her voice turned cold, her gaze burning straight through Jasmine like a spotlight. Your generation is the generation of excuses, not justice. There it was, the generational dagger. Judy didn't see Jasmine as an opponent. She saw her as a symbol of everything she believed was wrong with modern America. And now she wasn't just attacking Jasmine. She was attacking everyone who looked like her, thought like her, or dared to challenge the old rules. You don't want responsibility, you want to blame the world for your failures and call it reform. Each syllable pounded the table like a gavel, but there was no order being restored, only judgment being hurled. Judy's voice didn't shake. She was completely in control, or so she thought. The sound of her words slashed across the room, but the silence that followed was even louder. The crowd stirred. There were gasps, uneasy shifts in seats, quiet whispers traded behind hands. Some viewers in the gallery nodded, clapping softly, drawn in by Judy's brutal confidence. But others, many others, sat frozen, wide-eyed. Even they knew a line had been crossed. The shift in energy was instant, sharp, irreversible. Cameras zoomed in, catching every nuance: Judy's lifted chin, her piercing stare, her smile of righteous dominance. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was theater, a one-woman show with the spotlight fixed firmly on her. She had hijacked the hearing, turned it into a courtroom, and declared herself judge, jury, and executioner. But in doing so, she made her fatal mistake. She believed she had control. She believed the younger woman across from her was shaken. But what she didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly predict, was that in humiliating Jasmine Crockett, she hadn't shut her down. She had activated her. And now the room, along with the nation, was seconds away from witnessing a reversal no one saw coming. Judy thought she'd buried Jasmine beneath a pile of arrogance and insults. But as the dust settled, it became clear Jasmine hadn't flinched. She'd simply been waiting for her moment. Jasmine leaned forward slowly, not like someone rushing to defend herself, but like someone choosing the perfect angle before driving the knife in. Her fingers gently tapped the base of the microphone, then stopped. Her voice came out low, controlled, cold, and deadly calm. I didn't just learn justice from books. She said it like a warning, like the room had mistaken her quiet for weakness. Her eyes never left Judy's, not for a second. I watched it fall apart right in front of me. The tone in her voice wasn't raised, but it held a force that made the entire chamber lean forward. Every senator, every aide, every camera operator froze. They weren't just listening. They were bracing for what came next. a black teenager sentenced to 15 years for robbery. She said, her voice cutting the silence like a blade, while a white kid, same crime, got 3. The words hit hard, no frills, no drama, just fact. And somehow that made them even more brutal. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't need to. Her restraint was the weapon. The impact wasn't just in what she said, it was how she said it. Not with rage, with scars, with the kind of calm that only comes from watching injustice unfold so many times. It no longer surprises you, but still burns. She wasn't shouting. She was revealing, and it left the room speechless. Not a murmur, not a cough, not a shift in the seat. Even Judy's posture faltered for a second, her face flushing red, not from control this time, but from something closer to discomfort. She opened her mouth slightly, but no words came out. Her hand twitched near the mic, but she didn't touch it. Jasmine had locked down the entire room with a sentence. And then, without changing tone, without even pausing, Jasmine hit them again. I saw a mother lose her child because of addiction. In her neighborhood, it was labeled criminal. But in the rich part of town, addiction was a health issue. The line landed with terrifying precision. It was the kind of truth that couldn't be spun, couldn't be softened, couldn't be unheard. Her voice was steady, but her eyes held fire, the kind of fire you don't need to scream about because it speaks for itself. The silence that followed was heavier than before. It wasn't just quiet, it was paralyzed. The kind of silence that comes when the truth is so sharp it leaves no room for reaction. The hearing room, the press, the staffers, the panel became a frozen portrait of stunned discomfort. Judy's face had turned a shade redder, her jaw tight, her eyes darting for a comeback. But she hadn't expected this kind of blow, not from someone she thought she could belittle. She looked trapped between interrupting and retreating, her confidence finally cracking. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She turned her head just slightly, just enough to draw all eyes back to her. Her next line didn't rise, it didn't need to. It was spoken with that same cold calm, now sharpened with finality. What you call justice, I call systemic injustice. The words didn't explode, they detonated. Quietly, precisely, and in a way that shook deeper than yelling ever could. No one in the room moved, because everyone knew something had just shifted, and there was no going back. The room was still recovering from Jasmine's calm takedown, but the silence didn't last long. Judy wasn't used to being cornered, and she wasn't going down without lashing out one more time. Judy sat up straighter, jaw tight, trying to piece back the authority that was slipping from her grip. Her voice came out low and hard, like someone trying to suppress a tremble and cover it with steel. You're turning justice into politics. She snapped the words, biting and cold. I don't let emotion interfere with the law. She paused, letting that sentence hang in the air like a shield. But it didn't hit with the same force it once might have. It felt like someone trying to hold back a wave with a paper wall. She had spent decades presenting herself as the unshakable face of reason. But now that facade was cracking. Her line, meant to regain control, only revealed she had already lost it. The cameras caught it all, her tension, the quick blink, the faint tremor in her fingers as they rested on the desk. Judy wasn't debating anymore. She was scrambling. And across from her, Jasmine didn't even blink. Her face stayed composed, but something flickered in her eyes. Something focused, sharp, like a fighter who knew the opponent had finally left their guard open. She leaned in just slightly, the mic catching every word, and spoke with a voice so calm it was chilling. No, ma'am, she said each syllable, slow and deliberate. I'm bringing facts you don't want to hear. It was a verbal knife delivered so quietly it made the room even more tense. That sentence didn't need volume, it carried weight. It landed not just as a counter, but as a dare. Try to deny this. Then Jasmine moved with intention. She reached into her folder, not hurriedly, but with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and exactly what she was about to unleash. She pulled out a document and held it up for everyone to see, steady and clear under the camera lights. This, she said, voice turning firm, is a declassified memo from the Department of Justice. There was a brief stir, senators shifting, photographers adjusting their aim. She went on, her tone like a blade slicing through decades of denial. It shows that in the 1980s, mandatory minimum sentencing laws were intentionally structured to focus on crack cocaine, predominantly used in black communities. And just like that, the entire room stopped breathing. It was no longer a conversation about feelings or perceptions or experience. Jasmine wasn't sharing opinion anymore. She was presenting a weapon history policy and proof. The kind of proof that couldn't be ignored, couldn't be spun, couldn't be buried. For a full second, it was as if time froze. Everyone understood what had just happened. She wasn't accusing anyone vaguely. She had shown the paper trail the receipts of systemic design. This wasn't about anecdote anymore. It was about intent. Intent to target. Intent to punish. And suddenly, everything Judy had said about fairness, blindness, and personal responsibility began to crumble under the weight of that one sheet of paper. A few in the audience instinctively looked toward Judy. The cameras turned to her, hunting for reaction, for defense, for anything. But she didn't move. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her eyes flicked toward the paper, then toward Jasmine, then away again. Her fingers twitched once, then went still. And in that split second, everyone saw it. Judy was speechless. Not silenced by yelling, not interrupted. She simply had nothing left that could stand against what had just been placed in front of her. Her power had always been her certainty, her ability to speak louder, move faster, dominate with presence. But now faced with cold, official evidence of racial targeting written into law, she had no comeback. Her voice was gone. Her image, the tough, unshakable judge, was starting to fracture right there on live television. The room was paralyzed. Judy had gone quiet, her confidence shattered by the document in Jasmine's hand. But Jasmine wasn't done. What came next wasn't a rebuttal, it was the execution. Jasmine leaned forward slowly, her eyes never leaving Judy's. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It dropped into something low, cold, deliberate, like a verdict being read out loud. The power in her tone came not from volume, but from precision. "You once said justice is blind." She paused, letting the familiar phrase settle. "But your answer just proved that in this system, justice isn't blind, it's been deliberately blinded." The room tensed again, not from anger, from realization. She wasn't throwing punches, she was exposing truth. There was no sound, not even a whisper. Jasmine's words floated in the chamber like smoke, slow, suffocating, impossible to escape. She stared Judy down, not with rage, but with the kind of clarity that burns deeper than shouting ever could. "You turned real pain into entertainment," she said, her voice flat but heavy. "You yelled at the powerless on daytime TV and made millions doing it. And now you stand here in front of me pretending to lecture me about responsibility." The contrast was brutal. Judy, the once untouchable symbol of courtroom justice, now looked small beneath the weight of those words. And Jasmine didn't blink. She wasn't attacking Judy's past. She was holding it up to the light and letting the nation see it for what it truly was. Every camera zoomed in. Every audience member held their breath. Then came the coldest cut. Jasmine's voice sharpened, not louder, just sharper, like a scalpel. "Being tough on the powerless isn't justice." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "It's bullying, and I don't bow to bullies." The line hit like a silent explosion. Nobody moved. Nobody dared to. The sentence didn't just land, it shifted the ground. It was calm, composed, and utterly devastating. And the way Jasmine said it, not with fire but with finality, made it 10 times more powerful. She didn't stop. She reached forward and lifted the document again, raising it to eye level, not just for Judy, but for everyone. For the record. For history. Her voice stayed even, but her words carried like stone dropped in water. Crack cocaine penalties. Explicitly designed to target Black communities. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't a theory. It was a sentence from a real government memo, written in black and white, now echoed through marble walls that had ignored it for decades. And Jasmine had just read it into the congressional record on live national television with the very person who once enforced those laws sitting 3 feet away from her. The silence that followed was total. No one shifted. No one breathed. All eyes locked on Judy. Her face didn't move, but everything inside her seemed to crumble at once. Her lips parted slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. Her throat tightened. Her eyes flickered to the document, then to Jasmine, then to the blinking red lights of the cameras. Her fingers, once so quick to point and command, now rested limp on the desk. Her mouth trembled just once. Her expression froze. She didn't argue. She didn't deny. She didn't fight back. because there was nothing left to say. And for the first time in her career on television, in a courtroom in any public arena, Judge Judy was speechless. The chamber was silent. Judge Judy, once the loudest voice in any room, now sat, still stripped of her certainty, her power, her words. The truth had landed, but it wasn't just Jasmine Crockett who had spoken. It was history, and the audience knew it. The silence cracked first with a breath, then a single voice in the gallery whispered. She said what needed to be said. Then came the sound of hands, hesitant at first, then harder. A few claps turned into a sudden wave of applause that rolled through the hearing room like thunder. One by one, people rose from their seats. Not all of them, but enough. Some stood with their hands over their mouths. Others clapped with both palms like they were applauding a verdict decades overdue. The cameras caught everything. The moment when order dissolved into emotion, not out of chaos, but out of collective release. It was no longer just a policy debate, it was an awakening. Jasmine hadn't shouted. She hadn't insulted. She had sliced through a system with a document of voice and the terrifying precision of truth. And now the audience, senators, staffers, press, citizens, wasn't just reacting to her words. They were reacting to the fact that someone finally said them out loud. Judy didn't look up. Her hands stayed still on the desk. Her shoulders hunched just slightly forward, as if the weight of the past 30 years had dropped onto her all at once. The woman who once sat like a throne now looked like a witness. The studio lights hadn't dimmed, but the power had shifted entirely. The spotlight that once belonged to her now burned through her, and the silence she used as a weapon had been turned against her. Behind her, a congressional aide glanced nervously toward the production crew. The network director gave a sharp hand signal. They knew they had gold, but they also knew this was turning from broadcast to history. A voice in the control room whispered into the earpiece of a cameraman, "Zoom and get both of them. This is the shot." The camera panned slowly, almost reverently, as it captured the final tableau. On the left, Judge Judy head lowered slightly, eyes no longer scanning for an argument, hands clenched but trembling. Her mouth moved as if forming words, but none came. The silence around her was no longer respect. It was consequence. And on the right, Jasmine Crockett, calm, unshaken. Her hands moved without urgency as she collected her papers, sliding the declassified memo back into a folder, like a surgeon setting down a scalpel after a clean incision. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. Her face was composed, not cold, but resolute. It was the look of someone who came to deliver clarity and had done exactly that. She stood slowly, stacking her notes with the kind of care that comes from knowing the work isn't done, but the moment is over. The chair scraped back softly, barely audible beneath the lingering tension. As she rose, every pair of eyes seemed to follow her upward. Not because she had raised her voice, but because she had raised the standard. Judy still hadn't looked up. Her shoulders didn't move. It was as if her courtroom persona, so sharp, so decisive, had been peeled away in real time. And what was left was not a villain, but a mirror. A reminder that power once left unchecked can rust into cruelty. And when faced with someone who knows the law just as well, but carries it with empathy, there's nowhere left to hide. From the press box, flash bulbs popped like quiet fireworks. One photographer whispered to another that shot the one with Judy slumped and Jasmine rising, that's going to be tomorrow's front page. It wouldn't be just another political headline. It would be a reckoning. Anderson Cooper sat quietly watching the moment unfold. For once, he didn't jump in. He didn't summarize. He didn't try to smooth it over for viewers at home. He knew, like everyone else in that room, that this was the kind of moment that didn't need explanation. It needed space and silence. The applause faded slowly, not because the crowd lost energy, but because Jasmine had already begun walking away. She didn't wave. She didn't pause. She moved with the weight of something finished. Not a win, a closure. Every step she took was measured but not heavy. This wasn't a victory lap. It was the walk of someone who had said what needed to be said, knowing full well that silence had cost too many people too much for too long. The camera caught her just as she reached the exit, pausing at the edge of the frame. She turned slightly, just enough for the light to catch the edge of her profile. Behind her, Judy still hadn't moved. That final image, two women, two generations, two definitions of justice separated by silence, and one irreversible truth would burn itself into the memory of everyone watching. Then the broadcast cut. The screen went black, but the echo didn't fade. Within minutes, what had happened inside that hearing room exploded far beyond its walls. The line hit the internet like a meteor. "I don't bow to bullies." Just 6 words, but they spread like wildfire. Within the first hour, the clip had been reposted by activists, lawyers, celebrities, and even quiet civil servants who usually never shared anything political. By the end of the day, it had surpassed 20 million views. The moment Jasmine leaned into the mic calm and steady and delivered that line without blinking, it struck something raw in people. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a generational shift captured on tape. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, no platform was safe. The clip was everywhere. People cut it down to 10 seconds, slowed it for dramatic effect, stitched it into reels next to courtroom scenes from A Few Good Men in the West Wing. One version overlaid her voice with dramatic music and got 2 million likes in 6 hours. But the most viral format was simple and brutal: side-by-side photos. On the left, Judy finger-pointed eyes burning in full attack mode. On the right, Judy after the knockout, frozen eyes down, lips trembling. The caption read how it started versus how it ended. Memes poured in by the minute. One showed Jasmine as a Jedi calmly disarming an angry Sith Lord. Another quoted her over an image of a chessboard flipped upside down with the caption, "Checkmate." Quietly. Even brands jumped in too quickly, some said. A coffee company tweeted, "We don't bow to bullies either. Here's 10% off for every woman speaking truth to power." Cringe or not, the moment had gone fully mainstream. It was no longer just politics. It was cultural electricity. But while social media laughed, the academic world did something else. It took notes. Within 48 hours, Harvard Law School added the clip to its lecture on courtroom rhetoric. Stanford Business School featured it in a leadership case study titled "Composure Under Fire." Communication coaches began calling it the Crockett Method, a masterclass in flipping power through calm control. She didn't yell, one instructor posted. She didn't interrupt. She simply made truth too heavy to hold. Even military academies noticed. A retired Marine colonel tweeted that hearing that was tactical. Jasmine Crockett led the room without ever raising her voice. That's command presence. Meanwhile, news anchors struggled to describe what had just happened. MSNBC called it a legal schooling with moral clarity. CNN labeled it the most devastating silence in televised debate. Even Fox News, after hours of searching for a counterangle, admitted on air she stayed calm. Heavily armed with facts, it didn't stop there. Debate teams across the country began using her lines as examples of precision framing. Coaching centers cut together clips titled, "How to Win Without Raising Your Voice." And leadership podcasts buzzed about a moment where a young congresswoman held a courtroom icon in total verbal submission without shouting once. It became a case study in power reversal, how to turn the momentum of an aggressor back on itself. It wasn't just viral, it was studied, quoted, replayed. It became part of the cultural bloodstream. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just answered an attack. She had rewritten the rules of response. As the memes kept multiplying and the clip echoed across every feed, something deeper began to shift, not just online, but in the halls of power, in classrooms and in homes that had waited too long for someone like Jasmine to be heard. Praise came fast, but not just from fans or followers. It came from lawmakers who understood the weight of what had just happened. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez posted the clip with 3 words, "This is mastery." Senator Bernie Sanders tweeted, "Truth delivered with courage is the most powerful force in democracy." Jasmine Crockett reminded us of that today. Even Senator Joe Manchin, no progressive by any measure, issued a statement that stunned reporters. Congresswoman Crockett handled herself with restraint, clarity, and conviction. I may not agree with her politics, but that was leadership. On Capitol Hill, staffers whispered about it in elevators. Elected officials across party lines watched the clip on their phones between hearings. Journalists scrambled for statements. Political strategists started asking what this meant for Jasmine's future. And somewhere in the West Wing, someone added her name to a list labeled Rising Stars. The hearing was over, but her presence hadn't faded. If anything, it had just begun. But this wasn't just an American moment. The world had been watching too. British outlets like The Guardian and BBC News ran headlines calling it a generational lesson in moral clarity. In France, Le Monde described her performance as a study in composure and courage against institutional arrogance. Germany's Der Spiegel ran a side-by-side shot of Jasmine and Judy with the headline, "Silence can speak louder than power." And in South Africa, activists posted Jasmine's final words with the caption, "She spoke for all of us who couldn't." Academic circles responded with the same energy. Professors of law, political science, and media ethics used her hearing as a case study in everything from systemic justice to narrative control. One Ivy League scholar tweeted, "What we witnessed wasn't just a rhetorical victory, it was a structural confrontation. She didn't challenge just one judge. She challenged the framework." Colleges invited her to speak. High schools replayed her speech in civics classes. Activist groups began quoting her line, "I don't bow to bullies on posters, banners, and donation pages." But the most powerful response didn't come from politicians or pundits. It came from people. From those who had lived beneath the system Jasmine exposed. From mothers who had watched their sons disappear into sentencing disparities. From public defenders who had fought uphill battles in courtrooms built on uneven ground. From teachers in underfunded schools who had tried to explain justice to kids who had never seen it. They saw Jasmine not as a politician, but as a reflection of their fight finally amplified. Letters poured into her office by the thousands. Emails came in from across the country. Veterans, nurses, former inmates, social workers. "You didn't just speak for yourself," one message read. "You spoke for my brother who never got the chance to defend himself." Another simply said, "Thank you for not backing down." And through it all, a quiet message began to ripple. Not trending, not viral, but deeper. A message people passed along to their children, their friends, and themselves. Justice doesn't need to shout. It doesn't wear a robe or swing a gavel for applause. Real justice lives in truth. It stands in the quiet space between being provoked and choosing to stay composed. Justice isn't arrogance, it's courage. Justice isn't volume, it's precision. Justice isn't about crushing your opponent, it's about standing for those who couldn't. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett became more than a name. She became a symbol, not of partisanship, not of vengeance, but of what happens when someone tells the truth clearly, calmly, and without apology in a room where the truth has too often been silenced. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.